"Mom, it hurts to sit down." These words from a 6-year-old girl at dinner turned the whole evening upside down. Mom called the police when she found out the truth. Don't forget to subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching this video. Nia stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by boxes half opened, their flaps curling like tired petals, the weight of her new life pressing against her chest as heavily as the air in this house. The walls were painted a gentle cream, the carpet plush beneath her worn shoes, and every window let in the soft promise of morning light. It smelled like fresh paint and lemon polish, so clean she almost felt wrong standing in it, tracking in the last remnants of the small apartment she and Amara had left behind. She caught sight of her reflection in the glass of a frame already hanging near the stairwell. Her dark skin, her hair pulled back in a bun that had loosened in the rush of moving, her eyes searching for the woman who was supposed to look happy in this moment. This was supposed to be a good day. This was supposed to be the beginning of a safer life for her daughter. Amara was still small enough that she could curl into the space between the window and the frame of her mother's hip, but she was growing faster than Nia could afford to keep up with. Her daughter's tiny hands brushed over the edge of the new windowsill, eyes wide, dark, and cautious, tracking every creak of the floor and every shadow that passed across the boxes of toys Richard had insisted she bring with her. The man himself was busy in the kitchen, unpacking plates and silverware with the efficient, calm hands that had once held Nia's in the coolness of a coffee shop, telling her how easy it would be for him to help, how all she needed was a little stability in her life, and that he wanted to give it to her. He had seemed gentle then, a white man with soft laughter and a careful voice, who told her she deserved better than scraping together tips from 2 cleaning jobs, racing home to a cramped studio apartment to cook rice and beans, while Amara slept on a folding cot beside the single bed. He had watched Amara carefully, given her a small stuffed fox on their second meeting. And Nia had watched her daughter's small fingers grip the soft fur so tightly it was as if she'd found something that might stay. It had made something soften in Nia, something that had been hard for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to let herself believe in comfort. The first time Richard had suggested they move in, Nia had laughed, shaken her head and telling him it was too soon, too much, too complicated. But every month the rent crept higher. The bills stacked on the edge of the kitchen counter, the fridge rattled in the middle of the night, and the constant fear that something would break before payday gnawed at her like a slow sickness. When Richard kissed her cheek and whispered that he wanted to take care of them, that he wanted to give Amara a real home, it had felt like a lifeline thrown across the sea of exhaustion she was drowning in. Now, the boxes sat around her like question marks she didn't know how to answer, and Amara's quiet, careful eyes followed every move she made, like she was waiting to understand if it was safe to believe this was home. Richard came back into the room, smiling, wiping his hands on a dish towel as he glanced around the space that smelled like a new beginning. He bent down to Amara, ruffling her hair, telling her that her room was ready, that she could see it now if she wanted. Amara looked up at Nia, seeking her mother's permission, and Nia forced a smile, nodding, telling her to go ahead. She watched the small, cautious feet step over the threshold, pausing to look back, her stuffed fox pressed to her chest like a secret shield. The room was painted a soft lavender, with curtains that let the light through in gentle beams. A new bed with a thick comforter, a bookshelf with picture books, a small rug with stars on it. Amara's eyes grew round, and for a moment, the smile that Nia loved so fiercely broke across her daughter's face. She ran her fingers across the quilt, touching the spines of books, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed as if she was afraid she would leave marks she could not erase. "It's yours," Richard said, his voice warm, looking down at Amara with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Nia stepped into the doorway, clutching the strap of her worn purse, watching the way Richard's hand rested on Amara's shoulder, light but firm. She wanted this to be enough. She wanted to believe that this house, with its clean corners and soft lights, could erase the long nights in the cold apartment, the fear of eviction, the hunger that sometimes flickered in Amara's eyes when she thought Nia wasn't looking. They had dinner that night, around a sturdy oak table, Richard saying grace in a calm, practiced voice, his family's tradition, he told her, smiling across the candles at Nia, squeezing her hand. Amara watched the flame, her small hand resting on the table, not quite touching the plate. She ate quietly, chewing each bite carefully, as if she was afraid to make noise. Richard complimented Nia on the chicken she made, the rice seasoned well, the vegetables cooked just right. He said it with the same voice he used to correct Amara's posture, to remind her not to hum when she colored, to tell her to keep her toys in her room and not scattered across the living room. It was a voice that had a gentle edge, one that Nia found herself nodding along to, reminding Amara to say "yes, sir" and "no, sir" when Richard spoke. It was the price of stability, she told herself. It was the cost of safety. The first time Amara spilled her water, the glass tipping over in her small hand as she tried to reach for the bread, Richard's hand shot out, catching the glass before it rolled off the table. His voice was calm but sharp, telling Amara to be careful, to pay attention. Amara's eyes filled with tears, and she stammered out an apology, her small fingers trembling as she tried to wipe the water with her napkin. Nia reached across the table, covering her daughter's hand with her own, telling her it was okay, it was just water. But Richard's eyes flicked to her and she fell silent. Later, in the kitchen, as they washed dishes together, Richard told her that Amara needed structure, that children needed discipline to feel safe, that it was better for her to learn now how to be careful, how to respect the home they were building together. He said it with a softness that almost sounded like kindness, and Nia nodded, drying a plate with a towel that smelled of lemon. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. Amara's room became a quiet place in the evenings, her small lamp casting a pool of warm light as she colored or looked through her books. She would glance at the door when Richard walked past, her eyes following him until he disappeared down the hall. Sometimes, when Nia came in to say goodnight, she found Amara sitting on the edge of her bed, her stuffed fox clutched to her chest, her shoes still on her feet, the laces knotted tightly. "Are you comfortable?" Nia would ask, smoothing her daughter's hair back, tucking the blanket around her small body. Amara would nod, her eyes big and dark, but she wouldn't take off her shoes. One night, Nia tried to untie the laces, telling Amara she didn't need to sleep with them on, that she was safe here, that this was home now. Amara's hands clutched the blanket, and her breath caught in her throat, her eyes darting to the door before looking back at Nia. "Please, Mama," she whispered, her voice so small it barely made it past the stuffed fox pressed against her chin. Nia paused, the shoelaces half untied, and for a moment she felt the walls of the house closing in, the soft cream color turning cold under the weight of something she couldn't name. She tied the laces back, kissed her daughter's forehead, and turned off the lamp. In the darkness of her own room, Nia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the house settling, the soft groan of the wood, the distant hum of the refrigerator. She heard Amara shift in the next room, the squeak of the mattress as she turned, and the faint, muffled sound of her daughter's breath catching as if she was holding back tears. She told herself it was just the adjustment, just the newness of the house, the rules, the changes. She told herself that children needed time to adapt, that it was better for Amara to learn structure now, that Richard was right. But as the night stretched on, and the moonlight crept across the floor in thin lines, Nia could not shake the feeling that something in this house, something in the softness of Richard's voice, in the sharpness of his gaze, was shifting the air around them, pressing down on them like a weight they could not see. She rolled over, closing her eyes, telling herself that this was what safety felt like. The next morning, she found Amara already dressed, her shoes laced tightly, sitting on the edge of the bed, her stuffed fox in her lap. She looked up at Nia, her eyes wide, her mouth set in a line that was too old for her small face. "Are you ready for breakfast?" Nia asked, her voice bright, forcing a smile that felt brittle. Amara nodded, standing up, her small fingers brushing against Nia's hand for a moment before she let go. Downstairs, Richard was already at the table, the newspaper folded neatly beside his coffee. He smiled at them, told Amara good morning, and reminded her to sit up straight, to keep her elbows off the table, to chew quietly. Amara obeyed, her eyes on her plate, her small hands holding the fork carefully, her back stiff. Nia sat across from them, sipping her coffee, watching the way the light from the window fell across Richard's face, the way it caught the strands of Amara's hair as she bent over her plate, the way the silence in the room pressed against her ears like a low, constant hum. She told herself this was what stability looked like. She told herself this was what safety was. But deep in her chest, something small and terrified was whispering that she was wrong. And when Amara lifted her eyes, meeting her mother's gaze across the table, Nia saw it there too, a flicker of something fragile, something that was already beginning to fade. It was then that she realized the house, with its clean walls and soft carpets, was not a promise. It was a question. And Nia did not know the answer. The mornings in Richard's house always smelled like coffee and lemon-scented cleaner, the soft hush of the neighborhood outside pressing against the windows while Nia stood in the kitchen, pouring cereal into a bowl that looked too bright for the dimness in her chest. Amara sat at the small table near the window, the sunlight catching the edges of her braids, her small hands wrapped around the ceramic cup Richard had given her, painted with a fox she used to smile at when it was first unpacked. Now she only glanced at it, her eyes lowering quickly, shoulders tight as if waiting for a correction before she even lifted the spoon. Richard entered the room every morning with the same calm steps, checking his watch, folding his newspaper, smiling at Nia with that soft, curated warmth that once made her believe she was safe. He kissed her cheek, told Amara to sit up straight, reminded her to chew quietly, praised her when she did, and gently corrected her when she didn't. His voice never rising but never truly soft either, a thin thread of control in every word. Amara nodded, obeyed, kept her elbows tucked in, her feet hovering above the kitchen floor as she held herself as still as she could manage. Nia told herself it was normal, that this was discipline, that Richard was helping her daughter learn how to be careful in the world. She repeated that to herself while she washed the dishes after breakfast, the sound of the water mixing with the clink of the plates, Richard's hand warm on her lower back as he passed behind her, reminding her he was there, reminding her she was not alone. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that stability required small sacrifices, that Amara would adjust, that she would learn to be strong in the way Nia had never been taught. But the cracks in the facade began quietly, like hairline fractures that deepened each day, revealing themselves in the smallest moments that Nia tried to ignore. She noticed how Amara flinched when Richard walked too quickly past her, how her daughter's small frame would tighten, shoulders pulling up as if she were trying to make herself invisible. She noticed how Amara's laughter, once bright and sudden, turned into quiet smiles that vanished when Richard entered the room. Nia saw the way her daughter's eyes would dart to the floor, the way she would hesitate before answering a question, her voice dropping to a whisper even when asked about something simple, like whether she wanted apple slices or grapes in her lunchbox. At first, Nia told herself these were just adjustments to a new environment, to the rules of a house that was larger, cleaner, more structured than the apartment they had left behind. She told herself it was natural, that Amara was simply learning how to live in a place where there were expectations, where the floor wasn't cluttered, where meals were at the same time every day, where bedtime meant brushing teeth, pajamas, a story, and then lights out exactly at 8. But some nights, when she stood in the hallway outside Amara's room, listening to the soft rustle of sheets and the small, stifled sounds of her daughter's breath catching, Nia felt the first prickle of doubt, cold and sharp under her skin. There were moments that stayed with her, moments she tried to shake off. Like when she came home early one evening, the sun still high in the sky, the house unusually quiet. She found Amara sitting on the floor of her room, shoes still on, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her forehead pressed to the stuffed fox that had become worn at the edges. Richard was standing near the doorway, his arms crossed, his voice calm as he told Amara to clean up the books she had left on the floor, his words slow and deliberate. Nia had paused, taking in the scene, something tightening in her chest when Amara lifted her head, eyes red, nodding quickly, whispering an apology that was barely audible. Richard glanced at Nia then, a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth, and he told her that children needed to learn responsibility, that Amara would thank them one day for teaching her to respect her space. Nia nodded, swallowing the dryness in her throat, telling herself he was right, that this was love in its strictest form, that it was better than the chaos she had come from. She helped Amara pick up the books, feeling her daughter's small hand brush against hers, trembling slightly, before pulling away quickly to place a book back on the shelf, aligning it perfectly with the others. That night, Nia tried to read Amara a bedtime story, but her daughter only lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, her small hands clutching the fox, the shoes still on her feet, laces double knotted, dirt smudged on the soles from the playground she no longer asked to visit. Days became weeks, the routine solidified into a pattern that felt heavy around Nia's shoulders. Richard's rules grew into reminders. Reminders turned into corrections, and corrections became lectures whispered in calm, cold tones. Amara moved through the house like a shadow, careful, quiet, her eyes darting to Richard before she spoke, her small body stiffening when he placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm even when his smile stayed in place. She began to avoid sitting unless told, choosing to stand near the table, clutching the edge with her fingers, her eyes lowered, the fox in her other hand, its fur matted from being held so tightly. Nia tried to talk to her, tried to ask if everything was okay, but Amara would only nod, forcing a small smile, telling her mother she was fine, that she was just tired, that she would be good, always good. And Nia, tired from work, from the constant pressure of keeping up with bills that Richard insisted she should not worry about, but still managed to mention when reminding her of how much he was helping, chose to believe her. She kissed her daughter's forehead, tucked her in, turned off the light, and told herself that this was what stability looked like. But there were nights when Amara's whispers drifted down the hallway, small and broken, not meant to be heard, but Nia heard them anyway. Nights when she found her daughter sleeping in her clothes, shoes still on, clutching the fox like a lifeline, her breathing uneven, a small whimper escaping in the darkness before she turned over, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Nia stood in the doorway, the light from the hallway cutting a line across the floor, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, willing herself not to cry, not to let the fear she felt take root, because if she let it grow, she did not know what she would do. The isolation settled in slowly. Richard's family visited often, bringing with them their cold smiles and sharp glances, the small comments that felt like needles under Nia's skin. They talked about how lucky she was, how grateful she should be, how Richard was giving Amara a real chance in life, a real home, a real future. They spoke about discipline, about respect, about how children needed strong hands to guide them. Nia sat quietly, nodding, forcing smiles, holding Amara close when she could, feeling her daughter's small frame tense whenever Richard's mother reached out to pat her head, calling her a pretty little thing with a smile that never touched her eyes. There was a day when Amara spilled juice on the kitchen floor, the glass slipping from her hand as she reached for a napkin. The sound of the glass hitting the tile was sharp, the splash of the juice bright against the white floor. Richard was there in an instant, his voice calm but hard, telling Amara to look at what she had done, to clean it up, to be careful, to pay attention. Amara's hands shook as she wiped at the floor with a paper towel, her breath catching, her small shoulders shaking as she whispered apologies over and over, tears falling silently onto the floor, mixing with the juice. Nia watched, frozen, her hands gripping the counter, the words caught in her throat, wanting to tell Richard to stop, wanting to pick up her daughter and hold her, but she did not move. Later that night, Nia found Amara sitting on the edge of her bed, the fox in her lap, her shoes still on, the laces pulled so tight the fabric strained. Her eyes were dry, but they were distant, staring at the floor, unblinking, the small glow of the nightlight casting shadows across her face. Nia knelt down, reaching to untie the shoes, telling her softly that she could take them off now, that she could sleep, that everything was okay. Amara's hands gripped the edge of the bed, her knuckles white, her head shaking slightly, her lips pressed together so tightly they turned pale. Nia stopped, her fingers brushing against the frayed laces, and she felt it then, the truth pressing against her chest so hard she could barely breathe. She kissed Amara's forehead, whispered that she loved her, that she was safe, that she was here, but the words felt empty in the space between them. She turned off the lamp, closed the door gently, and leaned against the hallway wall, sliding down to the floor, pressing her hands to her face as the tears came, silent and heavy, soaking into her palms. She told herself that tomorrow would be better, that tomorrow she would find a way to fix whatever was breaking, that tomorrow she would find the courage to ask the questions she was too afraid to ask. But as she lay in bed that night, the darkness pressing in, the silence of the house deafening, she realized that the cracks in the facade were no longer small. They were widening, growing, and she did not know how much longer she could pretend they were not there. When she closed her eyes, she saw Amara's face, the way her eyes looked when she said she was fine, the way her hands trembled when she cleaned the floor, the way she flinched when Richard's shadow crossed her path. And Naya, alone in the darkness, let herself feel the fear she had been trying to push away, knowing deep down that something was wrong, that something had always been wrong, and that pretending would not keep them safe. She promised herself, in that quiet, desperate darkness, that she would find out what was happening, that she would protect her daughter no matter the cost. But as the moonlight moved across the ceiling, as the minutes stretched into hours, she wondered if she was already too late. Morning light seeped into the kitchen, catching on the chipped edge of the mug Nia held, warming the trembling in her fingers as she tried to steady herself against the counter. The house was quiet. That heavy sort of quiet that felt more like something living than the absence of noise, and it made her skin prickle as she watched Amara sit at the table, shoulders tense under the pale yellow of her sweater, the fox tucked beside her, worn and small. Richard's newspaper rustled as he turned a page, his coffee steaming in front of him, his eyes moving over the words while the silence between them pulsed with something Nia could not name. Amara's eyes flicked up to her mother, the barest plea hidden in their darkness, before lowering again to the edge of the table where her fingers picked at a stray thread. She hadn't smiled in days, her laughter gone as if it had never lived in this house, replaced by the tight, careful hush that settled over her whenever Richard entered the room. Nia tried to catch her gaze, to offer a small smile, but Amara only pressed her lips together and stared at the empty plate in front of her. Richard lowered his paper, looking at the clock, reminding them that his family would be arriving soon for dinner, that the house should look welcoming, that Amara should remember to sit nicely, to thank her grandmother for the pie, to be polite and quiet. His words were soft, wrapped in that practiced calm that had once felt comforting, but now pressed down on Nia like a weight she could not lift. The hours that followed passed in a slow, tight rhythm, the clatter of dishes, the scent of roasting chicken, the low hum of the oven, the broom sweeping across the floor, Amara moving like a small ghost, helping when asked, silent when not, her eyes following Nia with that pleading darkness that made her mother's chest ache. The table was set with the good plates Richard's mother had gifted them, the candles placed in the center, the napkins folded perfectly, each place a mirror of the other, neat and controlled. When the doorbell rang, Amara flinched, her fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles whitened. Nia moved quickly to the door, pasting a smile on her face as she opened it to Richard's mother and sister. Their arms full of dishes, their smiles polite and sharp, their eyes moving over Nia and the house in quick, assessing glances. They praised the smell of dinner, the cleanliness of the floors, the way the curtains let in the light, offering compliments that felt like tests, watching to see how Nia would respond. Amara hovered near the doorway, clutching her fox, her eyes darting between the women, her body pressing back against the wall as Richard's mother reached out, patting her head, telling her how pretty she looked, how grown up she was, how lucky she was to have a home like this. Richard's sister, Kate, laughed, adjusting her bracelets, glancing at Amara with a smile that did not reach her eyes, before moving into the kitchen to check on the pie, reminding Nia to be careful with the heat, to watch the timing. The house filled with voices that layered over each other, conversations about work, about neighbors, about church, about things that had nothing to do with Nia or Amara, but filled the space with noise that felt like a wall around them. Amara stayed close to Nia, her small hand reaching for the hem of her mother's sweater, holding on lightly, a silent anchor that made Nia's throat tighten as she stirred the vegetables, as she checked the timer, as she tried to keep her breathing steady. When dinner was ready, they all moved to the table. Richard's mother directing the seating, telling Amara to sit with her cousins at the end of the table, far from Nia, far from the safety of her mother's hand. Amara's eyes widened, flicking to Nia, the fox held tightly in her arms, her body trembling as she stepped toward the chair. Nia opened her mouth to object, to say that Amara could sit beside her, but Richard's hand touched her arm lightly, a silent warning, his eyes meeting hers for a fraction of a second before he smiled and thanked his mother for the pie. Amara stood behind the chair, her small body rigid, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her sweater, her eyes flicking from the chair to her mother, to the faces around the table, the laughter that rose in waves as the adults talked over each other, passing dishes, pouring drinks, cutting slices of bread. Richard's mother told a story about the church fair, about the children's choir, about how children these days needed discipline, needed structure, needed to learn how to behave. Richard's sister laughed, agreeing, glancing at Nia with that smile, the one that said so much without words. It was then, in that moment, when the laughter paused, when Amara's small hand reached for the back of the chair, when her eyes met Nia's across the distance, that the silence opened, sharp and sudden. Amara's voice, so small it almost wasn't there, broke the air. "If I sit down, it will hurt." The words fell into the room like a stone into water, ripples moving outward, catching on the edges of the laughter, on the smiles, pulling them tight, turning them brittle. The fork in Nia's hand slipped, clattering against the plate, the sound sharp, echoing in the hush that followed. Amara stood there, her eyes wide, her breathing quick, the fox pressed against her chest, her fingers clutching it so tightly the seams strained. Richard's mother blinked, her mouth opening and closing, her eyes darting to Richard, to Nia, to the small girl standing at the end of the table. Richard's sister let out a short laugh, the sound harsh, shaking her head as she reached for her glass, muttering about children and their imaginations, about how they say the strangest things for attention. Richard's hand landed on the table, palm down, a soft thump that made Amara flinch, his voice calm, measured, telling her to sit down, that dinner was getting cold, that she was being dramatic. Nia's breath caught in her chest, the edges of the room blurring as she looked at her daughter, at the fear in her eyes, at the way her small body trembled, at the way her lips moved, forming words that did not leave her mouth. She felt the weight of every choice she had made pressing down on her. Every moment she had told herself this was safety. Every time she had closed her eyes to the small signs. Every time she had believed the lie of peace over the truth of what she saw in her daughter's eyes. Amara did not move, her feet rooted to the spot, her eyes locked on Nia, pleading, begging, silent. Richard's mother cleared her throat, telling Amara to have manners, to sit properly, to respect the table, her voice sharp, breaking the hush, shattering the moment. Richard's sister rolled her eyes, muttering that children need firmer boundaries, that this was why discipline mattered, that Nia needed to teach her daughter how to behave. Nia stood slowly, the chair scraping against the floor, the sound loud in the space that had once been filled with polite conversation. She moved to Amara, kneeling in front of her, reaching out to touch her daughter's hand, feeling the trembling, the coldness of her small fingers, the way they clung to the fox, the way her eyes filled with tears that did not fall. Nia's voice was soft, almost a whisper, asking if something hurt, if she was hurt now, if she could show her, if she could tell her. Amara nodded, her head moving once, twice, her eyes closing, her lips trembling, but no words coming out. The silence was filled with the clink of a spoon against a plate, The sound of Richard's mother sighing, the mutter of Richard's sister as she sipped her wine, the weight of their stares pressing into Nia's back as she stood, lifting her daughter into her arms, feeling the small body press against hers, the fox trapped between them. She told them she was taking Amara to the bathroom, that she would be back, her voice too calm, too steady, even to her own ears. No one moved to help. No one asked if they needed anything. No one followed. The plates were passed, the conversation resumed in low murmurs, pretending a 6-year-old hadn't just dropped a grenade at their table. In the bathroom, the lavender soap could not mask the sharpness in the air, the heaviness that settled as Nia helped Amara step out of her tights, as she saw the red along the crease of tender skin, the marks that no playground could leave, the bruises that told stories and colors she had learned to recognize from the shelter where she once volunteered, from the stories she had promised herself would never belong to her daughter. Nia's breath caught, the metallic taste in her mouth rising, her hands shaken as she dressed. Amara again, as she pulled her close, counting her daughter's breaths, steadying her own, whispering that she was safe now, that she had done nothing wrong, that it was not her fault. When they stepped back into the hallway, the light from the dining room spilled into the darkness, golden and warm, catching on the edges of the framed photos, on the polished wood, on the smiles of people who would never understand the truth that had just been spoken into the air. Richard's mother stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her mouth tight, asking if this was necessary, if they were finished with the scene, if dinner could continue. Nia met her gaze, steady, unblinking, telling her that Amara was not well, that they were stepping out, that dinner would have to wait. She felt the eyes of Richard's sister rolling, the smirk on her lips as she muttered about drama and attention-seeking, about unstable people, about how Nia was tearing the family apart. Richard's hand touched her arm again, but this time she pulled away, clutching Amara close, moving down the hallway to the guest room, tucking her daughter into the bed, handing her the fox, telling her to squeeze it if she got scared. Outside, the night air was sharp, cold against Nia's skin as she stepped onto the porch, her phone in her hand, her fingers shaking as she dialed. She could see them through the window, laughing again, the plates clinking, the candles flickering, as if nothing had happened, as if the truth had not just torn a hole in the fabric of their comfortable lies. She pressed the phone to her ear, forcing her voice to stay steady as she spoke to the dispatcher, as she told them she needed help, that something had happened, that she thought her daughter was hurt, that she needed someone to come now. Her words tasted like rust, like fear, like the truth she had ignored for too long. Inside, Amara lay on the bed, clutching the fox, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, her small body trembling. But when Nia stepped back into the room, her daughter's hand reached for her, curling around her fingers, holding on as if she was the last safe thing in the world. And Nia, standing there in the cold glow of the hallway light, knew that she would not let go. The cold November dawn seeped through the thin curtains as Nia sat on the edge of the guest room bed, watching Amara's small frame beneath the blanket, the way her daughter's lashes fluttered against her cheek, the fox clutched in her arms like a lifeline. The air in the room was heavy with the scent of lavender soap from the night before, layered now with the sterile, distant smell of fear that no candle could cover. Nia had not slept. She had watched the darkness shift toward pale light, each hour pulling her further from the world she thought she knew and closer to the silent horror settling in the pit of her stomach. Amara stirred, her small body curling tighter before she opened her eyes, blinking against the dim light. For a moment there was confusion, a child's sleepy daze, until her eyes focused on Nia, and the flicker of fear returned so swiftly it made Nia's chest tighten. She brushed a hand against Amara's cheek, smoothing back the stray curls, forcing a soft smile she could not feel. She whispered that it was morning, that they were together, that she was safe, and Amara nodded once, clutching the fox tighter, pressing her face into its fur as if to hide from the world waiting just outside the door. They moved through the house in silence, the floor creaking under Nia's bare feet, the rooms filled with the ghosts of laughter that once echoed through them, replaced now by the heavy hush of truths unspoken. She could hear Richard moving in the kitchen, the clink of a mug against the counter, the low murmur of his voice on the phone. Calm, composed, the way he always was, even now. Nia's hand tightened around Amara's as they passed the doorway, the child's fingers cold and small, the fox dangling from her other hand as they stepped into the living room. The police had come and gone, their voices soft but firm, their eyes shifting from Nia to Richard, to Amara, back to Nia, questions layered within questions, their notepads filled with scribbles that felt like judgment pressed into paper. The paramedics had checked Amara, gentle hands, quiet words, and Nia had stood there, clutching her daughter's shoes, watching the way Amara's eyes darted around the room, never settling, never resting. They had left promises of follow-up calls, the promise of safety wrapped in the uncertainty of procedures, and Nia had nodded, clutching Amara to her chest as the door closed behind them. Richard had not raised his voice. He had not pleaded or shouted. He had looked at Nia with that calm, almost pitying expression, telling her she was overreacting, that children said strange things, that Amara was confused, that this was a misunderstanding. His words had fallen into the air like drops of oil on water, spreading, thick and heavy, trying to coat the fear with reason. But Nia had seen the way Amara's hands shook, the way her daughter had clung to her, the way she refused to look at Richard, the way her small body flinched when he stepped too close. Nia made breakfast in silence, the smell of eggs and toast filling the air, the normalcy of it mocking the storm churning beneath her skin. Amara sat at the table, her feet dangling, her shoes still on, the fox on her lap, her eyes on the table, not moving, not speaking, just waiting. Nia placed a plate in front of her, brushing a hand across her back, and Amara's shoulders tightened before she forced a small broken smile that did not reach her eyes. Nia sat across from her holding her coffee cup, the warmth burning into her palms, anchoring her to the moment as she tried to find the right words, the words that would make this better, the words that would make her daughter safe. After breakfast, Nia packed Amara's small backpack for school, her hands moving on instinct, folding the spare sweater, tucking in the small notebook Amara liked to draw in, slipping in the lunch she had made. Amara watched, her eyes following each movement, silent, as if waiting for something to break. When it was time to leave, Amara hesitated at the door, clutching the fox, her eyes lifting to meet Nia's, and for a moment she opened her mouth as if to speak, but the words died, and she only nodded, stepping outside into the cold morning air. The school was quiet when they arrived, the sound of the flag rustling in the wind, the distant laughter of children in the playground, the world still turning as if nothing had changed. Nia crouched in front of Amara, fixing the collar of her jacket, brushing her fingers against her daughter's cheek, telling her to be brave, telling her that she would be there, that she would be waiting, that she loved her. Amara nodded again, clutching the fox, her eyes wide, her lips pressed together as she turned and walked toward the door, her small feet moving carefully, each step hesitant, each movement watched by Nia until the door closed behind her. The house was too quiet when Nia returned, the silence pressing into her ears, filling every corner, every room echoing with the absence of Amara's small voice, the absence of her presence. She sat on the couch, clutching the fox Amara had left behind, pressing her face into its worn fur, breathing in the scent of her daughter, the faint trace of soap, and the soft sweetness that was Amara. She closed her eyes, letting the tears come, silent, heavy, her body shaking as she let the fear she had been holding back pour out of her, the fear of what she had seen, the fear of what she had ignored, the fear of what would come next. It was later that afternoon when the call came, the school's number on the screen, making Nia's breath catch, her fingers trembling as she answered. The counselor's voice was soft, careful, telling Nia that Amara had been quiet today, that she had spent her time during art drawing, that there was something she needed to see, that it would be best if she came in. The drive to the school was a blur, the world moving past her, the trees bare, the sky gray, the traffic lights changing without meaning as she gripped the steering wheel, her heart pounding, each beat echoing in her ears. The counselor's office was warm, the smell of crayons and paper, the soft ticking of a clock on the wall, the room filled with small chairs and bright posters that seemed to mock the heaviness in the air. The counselor, a woman with kind eyes, met Nia with a nod, her hands holding a piece of paper, thick and slightly crumpled, the edges bent from small hands. She handed it to Nia without a word, her eyes holding Nia's, steady, unblinking, as Nia lowered her gaze to the paper. It was a drawing, made with bold strokes of crayon, the colors bright, the lines heavy. A red chair, drawn with sharp edges, red lines dripping down the legs, pooling on the floor, a small stick figure standing beside it, tears drawn in thick blue lines streaming from the round face, the small hands clutching a shape that could only be the fox. Beside the figure was a larger one, dark, looming, the lines jagged, the mouth a harsh red line, the eyes black dots that stared out from the page. In the corner, smaller figures turned away, their faces blank, their backs drawn in dull brown, the word Mom scrawled above one, the word Grandma above another. Nia's breath caught, the paper trembling in her hands, her eyes tracing the lines, the colors, the shapes, feeling the weight of each mark, each stroke, the truth that was laid bare in the language of a child who could not find the words. She heard the counselor's voice, soft, careful, saying that they would have to report this, that they would have to follow procedures, that Amara had shown them this drawing, that she had said it hurt, that she had said she was scared, that she had said she did not want to play that game anymore. Nia nodded, her eyes on the drawing, her hands shaking, her heart pounding, the weight of guilt pressing into her so hard she could barely breathe. She thought of every moment she had told Amara to sit quietly, to behave, to listen, to be good. Every moment she had looked away, every moment she had chosen silence over questions, every moment she had believed that safety meant peace, that discipline meant love, that Richard's calm was kindness. The counselor placed a hand on her arm, grounding her, telling her she was doing the right thing now, that she was protecting her daughter, that it was not too late, that Amara needed her, that they would help. Nia nodded again, swallowing the tears, folding the drawing carefully, holding it to her chest as if it were Amara herself, fragile and precious, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe that there was still time to fix this, that there was still time to fight, that there was still time to save her daughter. When she picked Amara up from class, the child's eyes widened, fear flickering across her face before softening when she saw her mother's open arms, the drawing held between them like a shield, a promise. Amara ran into her mother's embrace, the fox pressed between them, her small body trembling, her breath catching as she whispered that she was sorry, that she did not mean to make trouble, that she just did not know how else to say it. Nia held her daughter tightly, pressing her face into her hair, breathing her in, whispering that she did not need to be sorry, that she was brave, that she was safe now, that she was not alone, that her mother believed her, that her mother would never let her go. As they left the school, the air cold and sharp and the sky heavy with the promise of snow, Nia felt the drawn against her chest, the weight of it grounding her, reminding her that the fight was only beginning, that the truth had been spoken, that silence would no longer protect the ones who had taken her daughter's laughter. And as they stepped into the car, Amara's hand slipping into hers, their fingers intertwining, Nia looked into her daughter's eyes and saw not just fear, but the small, fragile flicker of hope, the beginning of something that could grow, something that could heal, something that could live, if only they held on tightly enough, if only they refused to let go. Snow fell in thin, restless lines outside the window. The world blurred behind the frosted glass as Nia sat in the narrow chair beside Amara's bed in the women's shelter. The room was small, the twin bed pressed against one wall, a dresser with peeling paint in the corner, the fox tucked beside Amara as she slept, her breathing soft, shallow, and uneven. Nia's hands rested in her lap, fingers curled around each other, the drawing folded carefully in the pocket of her coat, the edges worn from where she had held it each night, a fragile shield against the quiet fear that settled around them like a second skin. They had left Richard's house under the dull glow of the porch light, Amara clutching her fox, her eyes wide and empty, the words of Richard's family echoing in Nia's mind, sharp and cutting, telling her she was destroying everything, telling her she was overreacting, telling her she was being dramatic, telling her she was tearing the family apart. Richard's mother had stood in the hallway, her arms crossed, her mouth a thin line as she told Nia that she would regret this, that no one would believe her, that she was taking a child away from a good home. Nia had kept her eyes on Amara, on the way her daughter's hand trembled as it held onto the fox, on the way her small body leaned against her mother's leg, seeking safety in a world that had never given it to her freely. She had walked out without looking back, each step heavy, each breath sharp, each movement a declaration that she would no longer be silent, that she would no longer pretend, that she would no longer let fear dictate her choices. The shelter was warm, the air filled with the quiet hum of other women and children, the scent of soup and laundry soap lingering in the hallways, the walls painted in soft colors meant to soothe, to comfort, to remind them that there was still hope even here, even now. Nia sat through the intake process, answering questions with a voice that trembled despite her efforts to keep it steady, her hands clutching Amara's tightly as she spoke of safety plans, of court dates, of police reports, of medical exams, of the truth she could no longer hide. Amara stayed close, her small hand never letting go, her eyes following every movement, her body flinching whenever a door closed too loudly, whenever a voice rose too sharply, whenever footsteps approached. At night, she refused to change into her pajamas, curling into the blankets in her clothes, the fox pressed against her chest, her shoes tucked under her pillow, the laces tied in knots she would not let Nia undo. She woke in the middle of the night with small, choked cries, reaching for her mother in the darkness, her fingers gripping Nia's sweater, her breath hitching as she whispered apologies, promises to be good, please not to go back. Nia held her close, rocking her gently, whispering into her hair that she was safe, that she was loved, that she was not alone, that they would never go back, that she would never let anyone hurt her again. She felt the tremors in Amara's small body, the tension that never left her shoulders, the way her hands would curl into fists around the fabric of her mother's shirt, the way her breath would catch as if she were bracing for pain that should never have been hers to bear. During the day, Nia met with social workers, their voices calm and practiced, their eyes flickering with sympathy as they explained the process, the steps they would need to take, the documentation they would need, the statements, the medical reports, the drawings, the interviews. Nia nodded, her hands clutching the drawing, her eyes on the pages of paperwork she signed, each signature a promise that she would fight, that she would not stop, that she would do whatever it took to protect her daughter. Richard's family called, left voicemails that filled the inbox with accusations and pleas, telling her to come back, telling her she was destroying Amara's future, telling her she was making a mistake, that she was overreacting, that she was being selfish. They sent messages filled with words that cut deeper than any blade, telling her she was ungrateful, that she was nothing without Richard, that she was ruining her daughter's life. Nia listened to each message once before deleting it, her fingers steady, her breath calm, her eyes on Amara as she played quietly in the corner of the room, drawing pictures of flowers and houses and small stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. The women in the shelter offered small smiles, quiet reassurances, gentle touches on the shoulder as they passed in the hallway, their eyes holding stories of their own, stories of battles fought in silence, of wars waged in kitchens and bedrooms, of victories measured in moments of peace, in the soft breathing of children who could finally sleep without fear. Nia found herself listening to their voices in the shared kitchen, to the way they spoke of court dates, of restraining orders, of child protective services, of new apartments, of jobs found and lost, of hope built from the ashes of everything they had left behind. Amara began to draw more, her small hands clutching crayons, her tongue peeking out in concentration as she filled the pages of her notebook with colors and shapes, with the houses that had no shadows, with flowers that bloomed under bright suns, with small girls holding hands with women who looked like Nia, their smiles wide, their eyes bright. Sometimes, though, the drawings turned dark, the colors heavy, the shapes sharp, red lines dripping from chairs, dark figures looming in the background, stick figures curled in corners, small faces with tears drawn in thick blue lines. Nia collected each drawing, folding them carefully, placing them in a folder she kept in her bag, her fingers tracing the lines, the colors, the truths her daughter spoke in the language of crayon and paper. She brought them to the meetings with the social workers, to the counselor sessions, to the meetings with the lawyers who offered their services pro bono, their voices calm and steady as they explained the process of filing for protective custody, of preparing for court, of gathering the evidence that would be needed to ensure that Amara would never have to go back. The nights remained hard, the darkness thick and heavy, the air filled with the soft sounds of Amara's restless sleep, the way she would reach out in the darkness, her fingers seeking Nia, her breath catching as she whispered words that made Nia's heart ache, words of fear, of apologies, of promises to be good, to be quiet, to be invisible if it meant she could stay with her mother. Nia held her, whispering back words of love, of promises that she would never leave, that she would always protect her, that she would always believe her, that she would always fight for her. It was during one of these nights, the snow falling softly outside, the world quiet and still, that Nia felt the shift inside her, the soft, steady certainty that grew in the space where fear had lived for so long. She held Amara close, listening to her breathing, feeling the warmth of her small body, and she knew that she was done being afraid, that she was done being silent, that she was done letting others decide what safety meant for her and her daughter. The next morning, she called the lawyer, her voice steady as she confirmed the court date, as she discussed the documentation, the witnesses, the drawings, the medical reports, the statements from the shelter workers, the school counselor, the doctors. She listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions, preparing herself for the battle that lay ahead, the battle she would fight with everything she had, with every breath, with every word, with every piece of evidence that spoke the truth of what had happened to her daughter. When she hung up the phone, she found Amara sitting at the small table in the shelter's common room, her crayons scattered around her, a new drawing in front of her, a small house with a bright yellow sun, flowers blooming in front, two figures holding hands, one taller, one smaller, both smiling, the fox drawn beside them, its fur colored in soft browns and oranges. Amara looked up, her eyes wide, searching, and Nia smiled, kneeling beside her, brushing a hand against her daughter's cheek, telling her that it was beautiful, that it was perfect, that it was them. Amara's small hand reached out, curling around her mother's fingers, holding on tightly, her eyes meeting Nia's. And for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a softness there, a small, fragile light that spoke of hope, of trust, of the beginning of healing. Nia squeezed her hand back, holding it tightly, anchoring them both to the moment, to the promise that they would face whatever came next together, that they would not be broken, that they would not be silenced, that they would build a life from the ashes of what they had left behind. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in a blanket of white, softening the edges of the sharp, hard world they had escaped. And inside the small room, under the hum of the heater, under the watchful eyes of the women who knew what it meant to fight, Nia and Amara sat together, the drawing between them, a promise, a vow, a declaration that they would not go back, that they would never be silent again, that they would keep moving forward, step by step, breath by breath, together. The morning air was brittle with frost, the world outside the shelter wrapped in the pale gray of early winter, the sidewalks glistening with ice that cracked softly beneath the boots of mothers leading their children to buses, to appointments, to courts where truths waited to be spoken under the flat light of tired ceiling bulbs. Nia stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass, watching as a thin line of sunlight pressed through the clouds and landed across Amara's small face as she sat at the table, coloring slowly, carefully, her small hand clutching a crayon so tightly the paper around it had begun to peel. It had been weeks of slow, deliberate steps, each day measured by the soft sounds of Amara's breathing at night, by the whispered conversations in the shelter's kitchen over lukewarm coffee, by the meetings with social workers who kept their voices even as they explained the system's cold logic, by the quiet evenings spent folding laundry while Amara sat on the floor, her fox pressed to her chest, her eyes following Nia with silent questions that never needed to be spoken aloud. Each night, Nia would tuck her in, smoothing her daughter's hair back from her forehead, pressing a kiss there, whispering that she was safe, that she was loved, that she was brave, that she was good, that she was home. Amara still slept in her clothes, the fox clutched in her arms, her shoes tucked beside her on the narrow bed, the laces knotted tightly, a small fortress she built around herself each night as she drifted into restless sleep. Some nights she would wake with a small cry, reaching out in the darkness, her fingers curling around Nia's hand, pulling her close, her small body trembling as she pressed her face against her mother's chest, her breath catching on words she did not always know how to speak. Nia would hold her, rocking gently, whispering stories about quiet mornings, about the way the sun would rise and fill the room with light, about the flowers that would bloom in spring, about the promise of a tomorrow where she would never be afraid to sit, to sleep, to speak. But the world beyond the shelter did not wait for them to heal. Papers needed to be filed, statements needed to be given, documents collected, testimonies prepared. The lawyer met them in the shelter's small conference room, her dark eyes steady, her fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the stack of files she carried, her voice calm as she explained what would happen next, what to expect, how to breathe when the questions came, how to stand when the room felt too big, how to speak when the silence in the courtroom pressed against the skin like cold water. Nia listened, taking notes in a small battered notebook, the ink smudging beneath her thumb where she pressed too hard, her hand shaking only. Once before, she steadied it, reminding herself why she was here, why she was doing this, why she would not stop. Amara sat beside her, her small body pressed close, her hand slipping into Nia's, her thumb brushing over the back of her mother's hand in slow, careful circles as she listened, her eyes wide but unblinking, her breath steady. The day of the hearing came with the same pale sky, the clouds hanging low, the air sharp enough to bite at their cheeks as they stepped from the shelter's van, the courthouse standing tall and indifferent, its glass doors reflecting the gray world around them. Nia's fingers curled around Amara's as they climbed the steps, each one feeling like a small mountain, the weight of what they carried pressing into their shoulders, into the spaces behind their ribs, into the silent spaces between their breaths. Inside, the hallways smelled of lemon cleaner and paper, the floor polished to a shine that reflected their shapes back at them as they walked. Amara's small boots making soft sounds against the tile, the fox peeking out from her backpack like a small sentinel. They waited in a room that was too cold, the clock ticking in heavy, slow beats, each minute stretching until it felt like an hour, each second a reminder of what they were about to do, of what they were about to say. The lawyer arrived, her presence calm, grounding, her words soft but firm as she knelt beside Amara, reminding her that she was brave, that she only needed to tell the truth, that she was not alone, that her voice mattered, that what happened to her was not her fault. Amara nodded, clutching the fox, her small hands shaking only slightly, her eyes lifting to meet Nia's, seeking reassurance, finding it there, in the quiet promise of her mother's steady gaze. They entered the courtroom together, the air dry, the lights too bright, the benches lined with faces that turned to watch them, eyes flicking over Amara's small form, over the way she held Nia's hand, over the way her eyes moved quickly, taking in the room, the judge, the lawyers, the court officer who opened the door for them with a quiet nod. Richard was there, his suit pressed, his hair neat, his face calm, his eyes blank as they slid over Nia and Amara, pausing for only a moment before looking away, back to the lawyer at his side, a woman with sharp eyes and a mouth set in a tight line. The hearing began, the judge's voice low, controlled, as he explained the purpose of the day, the process, the rights and responsibilities of each person in the room. The lawyer stood, presenting the documents, the medical reports, the statements from the social workers, the counselors, the teachers who had noticed the change in Amara, who had seen the way her laughter had vanished, who had seen the fear that lived in the way she flinched when a door closed too loudly, when a voice rose too sharply, when a hand moved too quickly. Richard's lawyer objected, questioned, her voice sharp, her words twisting around the truth, trying to reshape it, trying to cast doubt where there was none, trying to protect a man who sat silently, his hands folded, his eyes steady, his face unmoving. Nia's lawyer responded with calm certainty, each word measured, each fact laid out with the quiet strength of someone who had spent her life fighting for children who could not fight for themselves. When it was Amara's turn, the room fell silent, the judge leaning forward slightly, his eyes softening as he looked at the small girl sitting on the witness stand, her feet not reaching the floor, her hands clutching the fox, her eyes wide but steady as she looked at her mother, at the lawyer, at the judge. Her voice was small, but it did not waver as she answered the questions, as she spoke of the chair, of the pain, of the games she did not want to play, of the way she was told to be quiet, to be still, to be a good girl. Each word was a blade, each sentence a cut through the silence, through the pretense, through the lies that had been wrapped around her small body like chains. Amara's voice was clear, the truth spilling from her lips with the soft, determined cadence of a child who had lived too much, who had learned to measure each word, who had learned to speak only when it mattered most. The courtroom was silent, each person holding their breath, each word from Amara landing in the space between them, heavy and undeniable. Nia watched her daughter, her heart breaking and healing in the same breath, the pride and sorrow mixing in the spaces between her ribs, the tears rising but not falling as she held herself still, as she met her daughter's eyes each time they searched for her, each time they sought the anchor that only a mother's love could provide. When Amara finished, the judge nodded, his eyes soft as he thanked her, as he told her she was brave, as he told her she had done the right thing. The lawyer led her back to Nia, and Amara climbed into her mother's lap, pressing her face into Nia's neck, her small body trembling, her breath catching. The fox pressed between them as Nia wrapped her arms around her, holding her close, whispering into her hair that she was safe, that she was proud, that she was loved, that she was free. The judge's ruling came, his voice firm, clear, final, granting Nia full protective custody of Amara, placing a restraining order against Richard, ensuring that he would not come near them, that he would not take from them again the safety they had fought so hard to reclaim. The words settled around them like the first warm breeze of spring, a promise that the fight had been worth it, that the silence had been shattered, that the truth had been louder than the lies. As they left the courtroom, the world outside seemed brighter, the snow melting in patches under the thin sun, the air sharp but clean, each breath feeling like the first real breath in a long time. Amara held Nia's hand tightly, her small fingers wrapped around her mother's, the fox tucked under her arm, her eyes lifting to meet Nia's with a small, tired smile that was the most beautiful thing Nia had ever seen. They walked down the courthouse steps together, each step lighter than the last, each breath a promise, each heartbeat a declaration that they would keep moving forward, that they would not be silenced, that they would build a life from this moment, a life where Amara would never have to be afraid to sit, to sleep, to speak, to be. And as they stepped onto the sidewalk, the wind lifting the edges of Amara's hair, the sunlight catching the small smile on her lips, Nia knew that this was only the beginning, that there was still healing to be done, that there were still nights when the darkness would feel heavy, that there were still mornings when the memories would linger like shadows, but they would face it together, step by step, breath by breath, building a new life from the quiet, fierce promise that Amara's voice had made in that cold, bright courtroom. They would not be silenced. The air smelled of fresh paint and warm bread, the morning light pooling on the kitchen floor in soft gold as Nia stood barefoot by the window of their new apartment, watching Amara in the small yard beyond the glass. It was not a large yard, only a patch of grass edged by a weathered wooden fence, but it was theirs, quiet and safe, a small kingdom where Amara could kneel in the dirt and press seeds into the soil with careful fingers, where she could stand and feel the wind catch her braids, where she could look up at the sky and not flinch at the sound of a car door closing down the street. Nia watched as Amara's small hands brushed dirt from her palms, her fingers lingering on the leaves of the tiny sunflower sprouts that reached toward the sun, thin and fragile and alive. She had chosen the seeds herself from a shelf in the grocery store, her eyes bright as she held the small packet, reading the words with the slow care she had learned in her classroom, her lips shaping each syllable as she whispered that sunflowers would make the fence look happier. Nia had nodded, pressing a kiss to the top of her daughter's head, promising that they would plant them together, that they would watch them grow. Inside the apartment, the air was warm, carrying the scent of cinnamon from the oatmeal Nia had made for breakfast, the bowls still on the table, Amara's half-finished, the spoon resting where she had left it when she had jumped up to check on her plants. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms and a single bathroom, the living room just large enough for a couch and a low table, the kitchen opening into the space with a counter where Amara liked to sit, her feet swinging as she colored or read aloud from her small stack of library books. The walls were bare, waiting for pictures, for colors, for the shape of a life to settle into them, but the light that filled the rooms in the morning made them feel less empty, and Nia found herself breathing more deeply here, letting her shoulders drop, letting the tension that had lived in the spaces between her bones for so long begin to ease, bit by bit, breath by breath. Amara came in from the yard, the wind carrying the scent of grass with her, as she closed the door carefully, slipping off her shoes and placing them by the mat, the laces tied in neat bows that she had learned to make herself. She looked up at Nia, her eyes catching the light, the small smile on her lips soft and shy, the kind of smile that had been stolen from her for too long, returning now in cautious flashes that made Nia's heart tighten and expand in the same moment. They spent the days in quiet routines, Amara waking early to watch the light creep across the ceiling, slipping into Nia's bed with her fox pressed against her chest, whispering good morning before curling under the blanket and letting herself be held, her small body warm, her breath even, her eyes closing for a few more minutes of safety before the day began. Breakfast would follow, simple meals eaten at the table where Amara now sat without hesitation, her legs crossed under her, her elbows on the table sometimes, her spoon tapping against the bowl as she told Nia about the dream she had, about the book she wanted to read again, about the sunflower sprouts she hoped would grow tall enough to see over the fence. They walked to the school together, the path lined with bare trees, the air cold but not harsh, the sky sometimes gray, sometimes a sharp blue that made Amara squint and smile, lifting her face to the sun. She held Nia's hand until they reached the edge of the schoolyard, where she would pause, looking up, her fingers squeezing once before she let go, her small boots crunching over the gravel as she ran to join the line at the door, turning to wave, her smile bright, the fox peeking from the top of her backpack like a small, watchful friend. While Amara was at school, Nia found work at a small bakery down the block, her hands learning the soft weight of dough, the heat of the ovens, the quiet rhythm of kneading and shaping, of folding the edges of pastry, of watching the color change in the crust as it baked. The owner, a woman with flour always dusting her sleeves, spoke gently, showing Nia how to roll cinnamon rolls with even pressure, how to shape loaves so they would rise strong, how to press a thumbprint into the top of a cookie to hold a drop of jam. The work was quiet, honest, the hours steady, the pay enough to cover the rent and leave a little for the envelope Nia kept in the drawer for emergencies, for hope, for the future she was building one small day at a time. When Amara came home in the afternoons, her boots damp from the melting snow, her cheeks flushed from the cold, she would hang her coat carefully, placing her shoes by the door, the laces still tied in those perfect, proud bows. She would sit at the table with a glass of milk, telling Nia about her day, about the spelling words she had learned, about the girl who shared her crayons, about the teacher who read stories in a voice that made the whole class quiet. Sometimes she would bring home drawings, bright colors spilling across the paper, houses with tall sunflowers, skies filled with yellow suns, two stick figures holding hands with the fox beside them, smiling with round, simple faces. Nia collected each drawing, taping them to the refrigerator, to the wall beside the kitchen counter, to the inside of the cabinet where the plates were stacked, letting them fill the empty spaces with the colors of Amara's healing, with the small, bright proof that the silence had not taken everything, that laughter could return, that smiles could grow in the cracks left behind by fear. In the evenings, they cooked together, simple meals of rice and beans, of pasta with sauce, of vegetables roasted until sweet, of small rolls Nia brought home from the bakery, warm and fragrant, filling the apartment with a comforting scent. Amara helped, standing on a small stool, stirring the sauce, washing the vegetables, arranging the plates, her small hands working with quiet concentration, her eyes lifting to Nia's with that small, shy smile that grew more confident each day. After dinner, they would sit on the couch, Amara curled against Nia's side, the fox tucked between them, a book in their hands, reading aloud in turns, the words stumbling sometimes on Amara's tongue. But she kept going, her voice steady, her eyes bright as she sounded out each syllable, as she laughed at the funny parts, as she leaned closer when the story turned soft and slow. When the book was closed, Nia would smooth her daughter's hair back, pressing a kiss to her forehead, whispering how proud she was, how strong she was, how brave, how loved. At night, Amara no longer insisted on sleeping in her clothes, the shoes now placed neatly by the door, the fox still in her arms but no longer clutched so tightly, the lines on her face soft as she drifted into sleep under the glow of the small lamp by her bed. Nia would stand in the doorway, watching her, the quiet peace of her daughter's breathing filling the room, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the small sighs that came as she settled deeper into sleep, her fingers loosening their hold on the fox, her body relaxing in a way that spoke of safety, of trust, of home. Nia would return to the small living room, sitting with a cup of tea by the window, looking out at the quiet street, the street lights casting soft pools of light on the sidewalk, the world outside calm and still. She would think of the courtroom, of the fear that had once lived in every corner of their lives, of the way Amara's voice had risen in that room, soft but clear, shattering the silence that had once tried to keep them small, to keep them hidden, to keep them afraid. She would think of the house they had left behind, the walls that had once felt like safety, the way the light had fallen across the table where Amara had once whispered that it hurt to sit, the way she had flinched, the way her small body had tightened in fear. She would think of that moment, and let herself feel the sorrow of it, the ache of it, the grief for the laughter stolen, for the nights spent in fear, for the innocence taken too soon. And then she would let it go, breath by breath, letting it drift away like smoke in the cold night air, making room for the present, for the quiet, for the soft, steady promise of each day that came after, for the life they were building together in this small apartment with its bare walls and warm light. In the mornings, Amara would sit at the kitchen table, her feet swinging, her hands wrapped around her bowl, her eyes bright as she told Nia about her dreams, about the way the sunflowers would grow, about the stories she would write, about the world she would explore. And when she finished her breakfast, she would slide from her chair, placing her bowl in the sink, brushing her hands on her sweater, looking up at Nia with that small, quiet smile. And then, with the soft, simple certainty of a child who knew she was safe, she would sit back down, unafraid, unhurried, her small hands resting on the table as she reached for her book, the fox beside her, the light catching in her hair as she opened the pages and began to read. And Nia would watch her, her heart full, her breath steady, knowing that they were home, that they were safe, that Amara could sit without fear, that she could laugh, that she could sleep, that she could speak, that she could be, that she was free. In that small kitchen, under the soft glow of the morning light, with the world quiet around them, Nia knew they had won. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video for more stories like this, and feel free to share this video with someone who needs to hear it.